In the tranquil suburbs of Delaware County, Pennsylvania, the lives of Jennair and Mark Gerardot seem to mirror the idyllic setting. Professionally successful, socially accomplished, and by all appearances, living the American dream. However, their story took an unforeseen and tragic turn that would shatter the calm of their suburban existence. Jennair, an accomplished woman in her own right, and Mark, a respected professional, harbored complexities beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life. What began as a tale of success and love evolved into a narrative of betrayal and heartbreak. Jennair Gerardot was born Jennair Cox on December 19, 1970, in the city of Fort Wayne, Allen County, Indiana, USA. She grew up in the area until her late teenage years. She was a graduate of Bishop Luers High School, where she took advanced courses. Jennair first attended Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis, where she studied communication and was deeply involved in the theater arts and performances program at the college. She also continued with her studies in communication at Butler University. Jennair earned her BA degree in communication and theater arts. Throughout her life, she held several jobs related to marketing for several companies in the Indiana area. She worked in the city of Carmel and also Indianapolis and was the marketing manager at Circor Instrumentation for several years. In the summer of 1986, Jennair Cox met Mark Gerardot for the first time in Fort Wayne, Indiana. They were both teenagers at the time, and Jennair worked at a Taco Bell in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Mark said he was immediately attracted to her from the moment they met and commented on how beautiful blue eyes and big smile had taken his breath away. He couldn't speak. He was kind of tongue-tied. Their romance didn't begin until 4 years later, after Mark ran into Jennair again and found out that she was by then working at a nearby mall. He started visiting her often, and one day he said she pressed him to make a move, asking him when he was going to take her out. She said, "Are you going to ask me out, or what?" he said. I was quite shy. It was this honesty that drew Mark to Jennair. Mark said that Jennair was confident and unafraid to speak her mind, adding that her demeanor was the exact opposite of me. Melissa Murphy, a childhood friend of Jennair, said she remembered when Jennair met Mark. She said, "This is the one," and was so excited to an extent she could do anything for Mark. On October 23, 1993, Mark and Jennair got married. Mark was 25 years, and Jennair was 23 years at the time, and together they cemented a relationship that began in adolescence and carried them into adulthood. Mark said, "We were happy. I couldn't imagine not being with Jennair for the rest of my life." Just as with any other relationship, Mark and his partner Jennair had to deal with low points in their marriage. He said that his arguments with his wife could be epic, and that she would always win because she was always going to have the last word. One of Mark's high school friends, Mike Hartman, said, "I wasn't privy to all the behind the scene of their relationship and their life together, but I know there were intense disagreements. Intense to things. The couple maintained a strong marriage, but when the financial crisis struck in 2008, Mark would later be quoted saying that changed everything for us. Money had often been a concern and a source of stress for the couple, whereby both of them would often find that it was the main source of many of their arguments. In November 2011, they both moved to Greenville, South Carolina, where they both found new jobs in marketing. With the new environment and frequent exploring the state's beautiful mountains and beaches, Mark said they experienced a little bit of restoration for their marriage, which had brought them much closer than before. Everything was going on well for the next few years until 2017, when their renewed life in South Carolina came to a halt. Jennair had been laid off from her job and was having difficulty getting a new one. She lost confidence in herself and was becoming much less strong than the woman she had once been. It was around this time that the couple decided once again that it was time to search for new opportunities and a new beginning elsewhere. Finally, the couple decided that Delaware would be their new home, and immediately Mark began his search for a job opportunity. He saw that the University of Delaware was hiring a creative director in its marketing department, and if successful, he would be the supervisor. He sent an email applying for the role and received an instant message back from a lady 15 years his junior who would be his new boss, offering him an interview. His concerns that a woman 15 years his junior would be managing him subsided almost immediately. This marked the beginning of Mark Gerardot's first encounter with Meredith Chapman. Meredith Chapman was a native of Pennsylvania and was 33 years old at the time. She was a graduate of the University of Delaware with a bachelor's degree in communication and a master's degree in education. Meredith was also married to a man by the name of Luke, a former Newark City councilman. The couple had married in 2009 and lived in Fairfield Crest, Delaware with their dog Indy. When Mark attended his interview, he found that he was immediately attracted to Meredith, not only her beauty, but also her pure brilliance, saying, "When I sat across the desk from her, within 5 minutes, I didn't say it out loud, but I said, I have to work for this person." He further said, "She was so articulate and so energetic and passionate about the job and accomplished at her age to be in the position that she was in. I was dumbfounded." It appeared like Meredith was impressed by Mark because she immediately offered him the job, to which Mark gratefully accepted an offer for the position and moved to Wilmington, Delaware in November 2017, while his wife stayed behind in South Carolina temporarily to lease their home. Mark was excited not only because of moving to North, but also to see growth in his career, not knowing that this would be the beginning of the end of his marriage with Jennair. Mark spent his 45 days living alone in Delaware as his wife remained behind to arrange for their home to be rented out. During that time, Mark said he got to know Meredith well and also stated that the two had a lot in common and that one day she had asked him out for a drink. Remembering the events of the night, Mark said it was easy to talk to Meredith, and before they had gone home, he spoke to her about his marriage to Jennair, even if it was not necessarily in a negative way, and also told Meredith about losing his parents and his brother. Mark didn't know what was transpiring, stating, "I really didn't know what was happening." He went on to say, "I knew it felt amazing to be around Meredith, and I was confused by the feelings I was having, to be honest, until it became a little bit more forward with a dinner that we had. It was more of a date." Mark said the issues with his marriage also came into focus when he was with Meredith. It was during this time Mark started comparing Meredith to that of his wife, stating how Meredith started to tell him that he was good at what he does and how wonderful a man he was, something he said he had never heard from his wife's lips. Mark was hopelessly in love, stating, "That just made an impression on me. Here's this woman I think is amazing saying that she thinks I'm a wonderful man." 1 month after meeting Meredith, Mark said that the two kissed for the first time. He further said that while the energy was there, he immediately felt awful for betraying his wife and told Meredith that whatever was about to happen couldn't be because he cared for his wife. Nonetheless, he soon realized that he also couldn't give up on the feelings he was developing for Meredith, who he said had told him she was 9 years into an unhappy marriage herself. Mark said, "I felt enthralled. It was such a connection. To shut it down just didn't feel right. I had to at least find out what it was that drew us together." Before Jennair had joined her husband in Delaware, her husband and Meredith had already expressed their love for each other, with Mark saying, "It felt right," to tell Meredith that he loved her and that it was a very powerful feeling. In December 2017, Jennair moved north, and Mark said she could sense he was distant, and it wasn't long before she confronted him about her feeling that there could be another woman. Mark said, "She finally asked me, 'What is up with you?' You're acting different," he continued. "She said specifically, 'It's Meredith, isn't it?'" This was after Mark had mentioned Meredith several times when speaking about his new job. Although her husband denied the affair at first, Jennair would not let it go. She continued to question his relationship with Meredith. Aware that there was something between the two, Jennair began to pay attention to her husband, making sure she knew what he was up to at any given time. He further said that Jennair mysteriously knew things about him and Meredith, and that he couldn't understand how she knew them. Close to February 14th, 2018, Valentine's Day, Jennair finally got the proof she had been looking for. However, Mark's admission of an affair with Meredith came at the cost of Jennair, who admitted to him that she had hired a company to gain access to his phone, permitting her to read his text messages and also view his photos and records of calls he had exchanged with Meredith. Mark admitted the truth to Jennair that he had indeed fallen for Meredith because he knew he could not keep up with the lie any longer. Heartbroken and refusing to give up on her husband, Jennair asked Mark to attend a marriage counseling, which he agreed to attend, but on the day of their second session, Mark said he was putting on his jacket when he felt something bulging in the lining of his coat. Even though at first he believed it to be an anti-theft device that had been left inside, he decided to cut the jacket open and discovered a recording device, and with its lights already flashing, it was recording him at that very moment. At that particular time, Mark was very furious and went ahead and confronted his wife. In response to his wife, Mark said, "She told me she wanted to understand the degree to which Meredith and I were in the relationship. She was determined there was a plan between Meredith and I, and she was trying to listen to what that plan was." From then on, the relationship between Mark and Meredith would fall apart at an accelerated rate. Finally, Mark told Jennair that he planned on filing for divorce in May of 2018 after he had met Delaware residency requirements and could move out of their shared house. During this time, things were going well, particularly for Meredith Chapman, who had been offered a new job as the assistant vice president at Villanova University in Pennsylvania and moved to Radnor Township, Pennsylvania, which is part of the Mainline region. Meredith and her husband were getting divorced as well so that she could continue to follow her new relationship with Mark and could, in the end, be together. As Meredith and Mark's relationship continued to grow, Jennair started to see divorce coach Sheila Brennan, who said Jennair had a lot of bitterness and anger about being tossed away and being traded in for a younger woman, and that her client had a lot of fears about being left financially. Didn't she had just moved north and had not found a new job 1 year after losing the previous one? Things seemed to go from bad to worse for Jennair, and finally, all this had destroyed her mental health. Mark recommended that she see a psychiatrist and also asked her to seek support from family and friends, since she had even threatened to jump out of the window. Mark said she took the advice and that she seemed to have accepted the forthcoming divorce. Jennair approached her husband one day with a list of requests for the weeks leading up to him officially moving out. Mark said he believed that they had gotten through the worst things, but little did he know that this was far from the truth, and the worst was yet to come. Among the items on her list were going on hikes, having dinner, and generally spending some time together. Mark agreed to play along with Jennair's requests, stating, "It was odd, but I'm trying to land this thing so she is in a good place. If this is what she needed, then I was going to do that." Mark said his wife was acting normal for the most part, although she would occasionally break down and cry over the next few weeks. Jennair also began posting on the neighborhood app Nextdoor, asking for recommendations for an excellent marriage counselor for couple on brink of divorce. She went on, writing, "We will need someone who is very educated and experienced dealing with couples' issues including infidelity, depression, traumatic experiences, child-parents dynamics, being accountable for actions. However, in secret, she had been planning revenge." On the night of April 23, 2018, Mark and Jennair were supposed to meet for dinner to discuss the divorce agreement. But in a series of messages, Jennair informed her husband, who was already at the restaurant where they were meant to meet, that she was running late before sending another text telling him to go home. She wouldn't make it. As Mark got up to leave minutes later, he received a picture from Jennair. She sent him a picture of trash with a condom in the middle, which made him believe she was searching through Meredith's trash can outside her home. Then received more text messages, one of which read, "You ruined my life." The next two messages that Jennair sent Mark read, "I hope you find never happiness," and another read, "Bye, Mark." Mark tried to text and call Meredith multiple times, fearing for her safety and afraid of what Jennair might do to her. Unfortunately, all forms of communication went unanswered. He rushed to Meredith's house expecting to find a fight between Jennair and Meredith, but when he arrived, he found something worse than he could ever thought. He found Meredith face down on her kitchen floor with a pool of blood forming around her head. Nearby, he found his wife's body also lying on the floor. Mark stated, "It took 5 seconds and I screamed an obscenity and ran to her." He continued, "I just said, 'Baby, oh baby, what have you done?'" Meredith had gushed on her Instagram account about her position at Villanova just less than 2 hours before her death, writing that she couldn't be more excited. "Just a week on the job, and I'm already feeling the love from Nova Nation New Adventures," she posted at 5:42 p.m. Later that evening, she arrived at her home on Lowry Lane in Radnor Township, parked her Audi in the driveway, opened the door, and walked straight inside, completely unaware of the fact that Jennair had broken in and was hiding, waiting to attack her. When Mark arrived, Tim Mulvey, one of Meredith's neighbors, was there, and he said that he heard the commotion and that he went out to see what had transpired, and Mark told him to call 911. Sergeant Christopher Four of the Radnor Township Police Department said that the call made his heart sink. He stated, "We don't really receive those types of calls." He continued, "When we arrived at the scene, it was kind of chaotic. There were a lot of officers there." Mark, who seemed to be heavily breathing according to Christopher Flanagan, was placed into the back of an ambulance before he was brought to the police station as a suspect. After interrogating him and finding that the gun used in the 2 deaths was underneath Jennair's body, the police determined that she had broken into Meredith's home before murdering her and then killing herself. One day after the murder, suicide police received a tip from a person who said had seen a woman in a trench coat, hat, sunglasses and possible wig looking out at the house with binoculars. Police had also collected a set of car keys from the crime scene which they determined belonged to a Cadillac that Jennair had rented. Mark said learning about the Cadillac came as a surprise. He said he found all this mostly from the police and from the news. She had rented it 2 weeks before the tragedy, and it was parked right outside their apartment. Mark continued to dig. He pored over his wife's bank statements, phone records, and her computer backup, and found out that she was living a double life. After Mark admitted to the affair just after Valentine's Day, he said, Jennair opened up a secret bank account and credit cards, where she used the credit cards to purchase the audio surveillance equipment, as well as a lock-picking kit, computer hacking software, and DNA testing kits for his clothes. Mark also said she even bought sophisticated GPS tracking systems and attached them to both Mark and Meredith's car. Mark said, I think there were over 400 images of private conversations that Meredith and I had through text and Snapchat, and she would actually, in the middle of the night, get access to my phone, Mark continued. My best guess as to how she gained access. I was sleeping on the couch. She'd put my thumb onto the thumb reader. On March 20th, 2018, 5 weeks before committing the murder, Jennair bought the gun that she used in the murder-suicide. Mark said that her credit card statements revealed she had practiced shooting the gun 3 times at a firing range. Mark said Jennair had planted multiple devices in his clothes and that he found files containing hundreds of hours of audio that his wife had recorded and even transcribed the audio into notebooks. He continued, She took all my jackets and had a multitude of devices that she was cycling in and out, and that every day she would take it back out and then sew it back in, download it, and back and forth. She had done that for weeks. It came to light that on the night Jennair killed Meredith and herself, she emailed a letter to members of her family explaining her motive to a very chilling degree. She had started the letter weeks before, and she dated her entries and also wrote of how this was a payback for what he had done to her, quoting, That's as simple as it gets. Dr. Robbie Ludwig, a psychotherapist who studied homicide within marriages and read Jennair's letter, suggested that Jennair may have been pushed to kill Meredith and herself because losing the love of her life was something she could not tolerate. Dr. Robin went on to state, In my opinion, there was something about listening to the tapes that triggered rage and wound her up, Dr. Robin continued. It gave her courage to know that she was right, that he was bad. I think at some point when she gave up on life and became suicidal, that's when she became her most dangerous. I get sense that all of this was done to make him suffer. She was interested in being the judge and jury in this scenario of her own life and her husband's life. In a televised TV interview with presenter Dr. Oz Mark, revealed how his wife left a 15-page letter stating how she would have killed him too had he walked in on the crime. In the years since the event, Mark said he wishes he handled the breakup with his wife differently. He further said, I broke her heart and more than anything, out of all this, my regret comes back to breaking her heart and making her feel like she had no other choice. I wish I wouldn't have hurt her because I loved her. I still love her. I wish I could take it back. Mark said he has driven past Meredith's home several times as a way of trying to move forward, and by doing so has helped him come to terms with what happened so that he can let it go. The shockwaves of this story echoed through the neighborhood, leaving friends and neighbors grappling with the aftermath of a narrative that transcended the boundaries of typical suburban life. In the aftermath, the community came together, seeking solace and understanding, and grappling with the questions that lingered in the wake of this complex and heartbreaking tale. The Gerardot story serves as a stark reminder that human relationships are complex, and the consequences of betrayal can ripple through lives in unexpected ways. May it prompt conversations about mental health, the importance of seeking help, and the significance of fostering understanding in our communities. On April 10, 2008, when Chris Short returned home in the afternoon, he was horrified to discover his stepdaughter collapsed on the floor. Chris immediately contacted the police, who were met with a scene straight from a horror movie upon arrival. Megan was found half naked, laying in a large pool of blood with multiple stab wounds, and she was pronounced deceased on the spot. Her limbs were bound with tape, and initial medical assessments hinted at signs of sexual assault. The detectives were deeply disturbed by the brutality of the crime, and questions lingered in the minds of everyone. Who could commit such an atrocity against an innocent girl beloved by all? Investigations were carried out, eventually leading to the revealing of the shocking culprit no one had even suspected. This is the heart-wrenching case of Megan Landowski. Nestled by the Chesapeake Bay in Portsmouth, Virginia, stands a bustling seaport town, renowned for hosting both the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard. Its streets, adorned with trees, provide home to the naval officers and their families. Among them was Navy officer Chris Short, alongside his wife Angela and 3 stepchildren, Elizabeth Gable, Megan Landowski, and Corey Landowski. Having spent a year stationed in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, Chris was transferred to a naval hospital in Portsmouth, much to the relief of the family. The eldest among the siblings, 16-year-old Megan Landowski, wasted no time in enrolling in dance classes upon their relocation. Megan harbored a deep passion for dance, showcasing remarkable talent and aptitude from the outset. Starting with ballet, she swiftly expanded her repertoire to encompass various genres. Her mother described her as beautiful, friendly, and talented, and Megan seamlessly integrated into her new academic environment at Woodrow Wilson High School. Possessing a magnetic personality, Megan effortlessly attracted classmates, quickly forging friendships. Despite attending a prestigious high school primarily for dance, Megan expressed a desire to attend a regular high school to be with friends from her neighborhood. Described as vivacious and kind, Megan had a natural inclination for making connections, embracing friendships with everyone she encountered. Thursday, April 10th, 2008, dawned like any other bright spring morning. Megan woke up early for school, engaging in a conversation with her mother regarding an impending test before heading off for her classes. After exchanging farewells, they went their separate ways. Unbeknownst to Angela, this would be the last time she laid her eyes on her daughter alive. Megan's school day ended early and she went home. Her mother told her that she expected her call when she reached home. Upon arrival, Megan left a voicemail detailing how her day went, reassuring her mother of her safe return, and ended by telling her she loved her. She then went on to begin preparing lunch for herself. However, things took a dark and disturbing turn. Around 4 p.m. that afternoon, Chris, Megan's stepfather, returned home to find the door open. Though initially unconcerned, knowing Megan had been warned about leaving it open, he intended to reprimand her. Calling out her name yielded only silence as he moved through the house. Upon entering the kitchen, he was confronted with a harrowing sight. Megan, lifeless on the floor, a victim of murder. Chris would later recall how he found her, likening her to a porcelain doll, hauntingly still and staring out to space. Local detective Doug Funkhauser was en route to celebrate his anniversary with his wife when he received the distressing call about a young girl's murder in town. Rushing to Roberts Court in Portsmouth, he was confronted with a horrifying sight. Bloodstains on the door handle caught his attention as he approached the residence. Inside, in the kitchen, he discovered the grisly scene. The teenager's partially naked body sprawled on the floor. Megan lay amidst a sizable pool of blood, bearing multiple stab wounds across her back, neck, face, and throat, with her mouth sealed shut with tape. For Detective Funkhauser, who was a seasoned investigator, this case stood out as one of the most brutal he had ever encountered, compounded by the fact that the victim was a young child. The thought of his own 3 children intensified his determination to bring the perpetrator to justice. Despite Megan not having invited the killer into the house, there were no signs of forced entry. However, a leaf discovered inside, traced back to the bush by the window, indicated that the assailant had gained access through the first-floor window. Upon entry, the assault initiated in an upstairs bedroom, evident from the disarrayed bed that suggested a struggle had ensued. Her underwear lay discarded on the floor, and beneath the left corner of the bed was a tape dispenser that seemingly matched the tape used to bind her arms and face. Bloodstains on the tape were collected for analysis. Additionally, police gathered pillows, sheets, and blankets from the bed. As forensic experts delved deeper, the bedroom yielded increasingly disturbing evidence. Seminal fluid discovered on the duvet and in Megan's underwear indicated she had been sexually assaulted before the vicious attack downstairs. Megan sustained 43 stab wounds, 11 inflicted after her death. As mentioned earlier, she was found naked from the waist down, with her arms bound behind her using tape. It didn't take long for the forensic team to identify the potential murder weapon. They noticed a knife was missing from the holder on the kitchen counter, later locating it in the sink. It was determined that Megan was initially attacked in her room but managed to run downstairs before being fatally assaulted. The perpetrator then traversed the house, leaving behind footprints. They then washed their hands in the sink, leaving behind one of the 2 knives used in the murder. The other knife, taken from the kitchen knife block, was discovered in a storm drain nearby. Detectives knew that they needed to arrest the killer, and they had to do it urgently. The investigation commenced quickly, with officers canvassing the neighborhood, diligently seeking witnesses who might have observed or heard anything untoward during the time of the crime. Alarmingly, no one came forward with any pertinent information. It appeared the perpetrator had managed to escape in broad daylight. Fear gripped the town, with parents anxiously concerned for the safety of their children, many too frightened to sleep at night, knowing a killer was still at large. Following the initial shock after their daughter's murder, Angela and Chris promptly informed the police of their suspicion regarding the perpetrator's identity. They implicated a former acquaintance with a troubled past, confident in their belief. When Megan had just turned 16 years old, she was sexually assaulted by Robert Hickey, a Navy colleague of her stepfather, Chris. Robert served as a fellow Navy tech alongside Chris. Chris mentioned that they quickly developed a close bond and regularly extended invitations to the Hickey family. Following this, Megan's demeanor had changed, characterized by being withdrawn and a decline in academic performance. Chris inquired about her well-being, but Megan initially hesitated to confide in him. Eventually, Chris persuaded Megan to share what bothered her, and she opened up. Robert was secretly sexually assaulting her. Chris was angered and disgusted, immediately cutting off all connections with the Hickey family and reporting the abuse. At this point, Megan's parents had initiated legal action just 5 months before her murder, with a trial awaiting. They now suspected that Robert had killed Megan to prevent her from testifying against him, fearing the potential damage to his reputation and the risk of incarceration. Megan had even voiced concerns about him coming after her, and tragically, it appeared her apprehensions had materialized. Officers were dispatched to Hickey's residence for a search, but unfortunately, they found no incriminating evidence linking him to the murder. However, upon later examination of his computer, clear signs of an attempt to erase the hard drive were discovered. A recently deleted file was uncovered during the search, revealing illicit photos of underage children and resulting in Hickey being found in possession of child porn. This discovery elevated Robert as the primary suspect. He was brought in for questioning regarding the murder, with authorities hoping for a confession. Despite appearing visibly nervous during the interview, Robert claimed to have been at the Navy base the entire day of Megan's murder, denying any involvement and asserting that he had not left the base on the day of the incident. After corroborating his timeline with his colleagues, the police realized that there was a period of time during which Robert hadn't been seen, raising the possibility of his involvement in the murder. Surveillance footage from the base was obtained, but no sign of Robert leaving was observed. Nevertheless, he remained a suspect and couldn't be entirely ruled out. A DNA swab was taken from Robert to compare with the DNA found at the crime scene. The results came as a surprise. There was no match. Robert was not Megan's killer. This setback left officers feeling disheartened as they found themselves without leads or suspects. Attention shifted towards Chris, who had found her body. After obtaining a DNA sample, he was swiftly ruled out as a suspect. Additionally, all of Megan's family members, including her younger brother Corey, were cleared. An autopsy later revealed the brutality of the murder, with Megan being subjected to what was termed as an overkill. The level of violence suggested intense anger from the perpetrator, raising questions about their motive. Given Megan's popularity and lack of enemies, it seemed likely that the culprit was someone known to her. But with no apparent enemies, the mystery deepened regarding who would commit such a horrific act. As the investigation yielded no suspects, Megan's parents grappled with the unsettling prospect of her case remaining unresolved, depriving them of justice for their daughter. Detectives decided to delve deeper into Megan's school life. considering the prospect of a clandestine boyfriend, an admirer, or an adversary within her school community. They interrogated Megan's close friend in hopes of uncovering potential leads, but she was unable to offer any valuable insights. Subsequently, police interviewed other acquaintances from Woodrow Wilson High School, revealing that Megan had engaged in a few romantic relationships, but none of them were really serious. While none of these individuals emerged as suspects, authorities opted to collect DNA samples from them as a precautionary measure to eliminate any potential connections. Forensic experts specializing in biogeographical analysis re-examined the DNA evidence collected from the crime scene in an effort to determine the geographical origin of the perpetrator. Their analysis indicated that they were seeking an African-American male. Despite 6 months elapsing with no significant breakthroughs in the case, a breakthrough occurred when a cooperative classmate provided the police with valuable information: a list of boys whom Megan had occasionally engaged in flirtatious interactions. Upon review, all individuals on the list except one had already been interviewed. This exception was 17-year-old Robert Lee Barnes. Apart from her actual school education, Megan had also been enrolled in a performing arts program at Churchill High School, where Robert Barnes was also a participant. Megan had once told her close friend that she believed Robert had feelings for her, feelings she did not reciprocate. Robert Barnes, a talented violinist, was regarded as a diligent student who never encountered any disciplinary issues at school and was not known to cause trouble. He shared a close friendship with Megan and had even visited her home on several occasions. According to her parents, he was always polite and very kind. When police located him for questioning regarding Megan, the interview followed the standard procedure, just like the other previous interviews they had carried out. Robert informed investigators that Megan was a kind and pleasant individual, expressing disbelief at the notion of anyone wishing her harm. He mentioned their participation in recitals together and their occasional hangouts. Police didn't find anything suspicious during the interview until towards the end of it. When asked if he would provide a DNA sample, Robert hesitated before refusing, which raised eyebrows among investigators since all of Megan's other classmates had been cooperative. Robert politely explained that his mother wouldn't agree to it, but police clarified that parental consent wasn't necessary, especially considering Robert was now 17 years old. Despite this, Robert declined once again. Investigators couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss with Robert Barnes. After concluding the interview, they instructed him to seek his mother's consent for the DNA sample and to contact them afterward. The following day, investigators received a call from Robert requesting a meeting. When asked if he had sought his mother's consent, he replied, "No, but you can have my bubble gum." Robert removed the gum from his mouth, placed it in a latex glove, and handed it over. Despite his change of heart, investigators still remained suspicious of Robert. Later on, the detective received a call from the lab analyzing the bubble gum. They inquired about the sample's origin. After confirming that he had observed Robert placing the gum into the glove, they questioned whether he had been under constant observation, as the DNA, much to their surprise, matched that of a female. Robert had switched the gum he was chewing with a different piece that he provided as his sample. On October 23, 2008, Robert Barnes was summoned for questioning once more, and this time accompanied by his mother to confront him with the DNA findings. During the interview, after he was questioned about the bubble gum, Robert slipped up by stating, "This happened on a Thursday." Up to that point, none of the individuals interviewed by the police had been aware of the exact day and date of the murder. When officers pointed this out to him, he offered an absurd explanation. He spun a tale alleging that on that particular day, Megan had asked him to come by her home. Upon arrival, he allegedly discovered Megan being held at gunpoint by a masked individual. According to Robert, the assailant then turned the firearm on him, coercing him to tie Megan up. He further claimed that he was compelled to commit sexual assault on Megan under duress. Subsequently, he asserted that they all went downstairs, where the gunman proceeded to stab Megan after seizing a knife. Robert asserted that the assailant then forced him to cut himself, ensuring his blood would be present at the crime scene. Robert had fabricated this narrative in an attempt to portray himself as a victim and explain away any potential incriminating evidence against him. However, law enforcement remained skeptical of his account and did not buy any of his claims. Presenting him with the evidence of footprints, they questioned why only his footprints were found and not those of the alleged assailant. Robert's mother intervened, advising him to stop speaking, and vouched for his character, claiming he was a good and innocent kid. The police took a sample of his actual DNA this time round. Upon DNA analysis, the results confirmed a match between Robert's DNA and the assailants, undermining his claims. Robert Barnes was arrested for the murder of Megan Landowski. The news left Megan's parents in shock, as they couldn't fathom that the quiet boy who used to ride the school bus with their daughter could be capable of such violence. According to police, Robert likely gained entry to the home through the window that afternoon, surprising Megan in her bedroom before committing the atrocious acts. Megan managed to flee downstairs, but Robert pursued her, stabbing her with a kitchen knife, and continued to do so even after her death. Afterward, he departed the scene, carrying on with his life as if nothing had occurred. The investigators speculated that Robert developed an unhealthy obsession over Megan, while Megan only desired a platonic relationship between them. When Robert's advances were rebuffed, he resorted to coercion, ultimately spiraling down a destructive path that culminated in tragedy. In September 2009, Robert opted for a special plea arrangement that spared him from being tried as an adult, as he had turned 18. He admitted guilt to charges of first-degree murder and aggravated sexual battery. Robert Lee Barnes received a 42-year prison sentence and remains incarcerated at the Red Onion State Prison in Wise County, Virginia. Whether driven by love, desire, bitterness, or the sting of rejection, none of these justified Robert's actions and his atrocious deeds to someone he claimed to love and care for. Instead of accepting to move on, he chose a dark path that led to a tragic fate, ending the life of an innocent soul and, in the process, ruining his life and affecting the lives of Megan's loved ones. Megan Landowski's tragic story mirrors countless others, highlighting the perilous consequences that can arise from such situations. We extend our heartfelt prayers and thoughts to her departed soul and the loved ones she left behind. One morning around 7 a.m., a neighbor called the police to report a smoke alarm going off at a nearby house. An officer soon arrived, and after knocking several times with no response, he tried the door and found it unlocked. As he cautiously inspected each room, he made his way upstairs. What he found in the first bedroom sent chills down his spine. Inside, he found a body that appeared to be that of a teenage girl. Realizing he had discovered a crime scene, he immediately called for backup. More bodies were soon uncovered, and the investigation began to unravel the dark events that had taken place and why anyone would harm such a lovely family. This is the horrifying case of the Harris family. In today's video, we take a look at a case that took place in the town of Dryden in New York during the holiday season that involved Warren Harris and his family. For 39-year-old Warren Harris, also known as Tony, his 41-year-old wife Dolores, also known as Dodie, and their children, 15-year-old Shelby and 11-year-old Mark, Christmas had always been a cherished time, and the 1989 holiday season was no different. Dodie ran a gift shop in a renovated barn about 50 yards from their main home, while Tony held an executive position at an electronics distribution center. Their expansive house in the town of Dryden was fully decorated in anticipation of the upcoming festivities, and they went out of their way to make sure that family, friends, and visitors felt welcome. On Friday, December 22nd, Dodie spent most of the day alone. Around 4 p.m., the kids came home from school. The Finger Lakes region of New York was blanketed in snow, with more expected. As usual, the children relaxed in front of the TV while Dodie prepared dinner. Tony was expected home by about 5:30, and the afternoon was passing by swiftly. It was during this brief 90-minute window, when the three of them were alone in the house, that a killer made their move. While the exact trigger for the ensuing nightmare remains unknown, it is suspected that the ordeal began when someone knocked on the door seeking assistance. Those who knew Dodie well agreed that she would have readily allowed a stranger into the house to use the phone. It is believed that Tony arrived just as the terrifying events were unfolding. Overwhelmed and caught off guard by the horrifying events that were happening, he was unable to protect his loved ones. What is known is that by the end of the night, the sole survivor of the Harris family was a kitten named Shadow. Around 7 a.m. the following day, a neighbor called the police to report a smoke alarm going off at the Harris home. By 7:30, an officer arrived at 1886 Ellis Hollow Road. After several unanswered knocks, the officer tried the door and found it unlocked. Upon entering, he smelled a faint hint of smoke, similar to what one might expect from a kitchen accident. It was only when he saw a gas can in the living room that he suspected the fire might have been intentionally started. As he moved through the seemingly deserted house, he observed that the power was out and the phone lines were cut. The oppressive silence throughout the rooms created an unsettling atmosphere, suggesting that if anyone else was present, they were no longer alive. After carefully ascending the stairs, he peered into the first bedroom and made a harrowing discovery. Inside the scorched room lay the body of what appeared to be a teenage girl. Realizing he had encountered a crime scene, he promptly called for backup. While awaiting reinforcements, the officer surveyed the room, taking care not to disturb the evidence. It was clear from the girl's condition that she had been shot in the head, and her partial nudity suggested she had been sexually assaulted. Although she was not restrained, she was blindfolded. Next to her on the floor was the body of a dog, deceased, but without visible signs of trauma. When the officer moved to a nearby bedroom, he found 3 more victims, 2 adults and a child. All had been hogtied and shot execution style with pillowcases over their heads. Despite signs of burning, the damage to the bodies was minimal. By the end of the morning, the victims were confirmed to be Tony, Dodie, Shelby, and Mark Harris. As detectives searched the property for evidence, they noted that the family's van was missing from the garage. Later that day, the vehicle was discovered abandoned in a local mall parking lot, likely by the perpetrator or perpetrators. The medical examiner determined that Shelby had been tortured and sexually assaulted before being killed. It was estimated that the family's suffering had lasted from around 6 to 10 p.m. Investigators found that gasoline had been poured upstairs and set ablaze to destroy evidence, but the fire had mostly extinguished itself, preserving much of the crime scene. Curiously, it appeared that the murder sites had been thoroughly cleaned afterward, leading detectives to suspect that the perpetrator or perpetrators might have had professional janitorial experience. During interviews with the neighbors, one recalled seeing a black male on a bicycle riding up and down the street just before dark the previous evening. Since it got dark around 5 p.m., this would place the cyclist near the Harris home while Dodie and her children were preparing for dinner. Given that the only tire tracks in the freshly fallen snow were from the family's van, it seemed probable that the killer arrived by a different mode of transportation. Earlier that evening, a woman driving home with her young child had noticed a man matching the description struggling on his bike along the snowy highway. Although she had considered offering him a ride, she decided against it due to her fussy toddler. Unbeknownst to her at the time, her decision likely spared her life. When the news of the murders spread, investigators also discovered that the family's credit cards had been used to buy hundreds of dollars worth of clothing, jewelry, and electronics at the mall where the van was found. After interviewing the clerks who processed the transactions, a composite sketch of the suspects was created. Once these images were shared with the public, tips identified the suspects as 54-year-old Shirley King and her 33-year-old son, Michael, who also went by the name Anthony Turner. Investigations revealed that Shirley worked part-time as a house cleaner and at the reservation desk of a well-known bed and breakfast. Her son, who had worked intermittently as a janitor, had a criminal record showing a preference for robbery over conventional employment. As the investigation progressed, another neighbor came forward, reporting that he had seen a black male with an older female driving the Harris's van past his house at 6:50 a.m. After seeing the sketches of Michael and Shirley King, he confirmed they were the individuals he had observed. Since this sighting occurred just minutes before the police were alerted about the smoke alarm, it was considered a significant lead. Unfortunately for the investigators, the witness later retracted his statement, admitting he hadn't seen the two clearly enough to make a reliable identification. On February 7, 1990, police went to the apartment where Michael King was living with his girlfriend and their 2-year-old child. When he did not respond to their knock, they forced entry. Inside, they found King sitting with a shotgun. He fired a shot before being gunned down by the officers. A ballistics expert later confirmed that King's weapon was the same one used to kill the Harris family. While some doubted the details of the confrontation, King's history with law enforcement provided insight into his mindset. It was reported that after one of his many encounters with police, he had allegedly expressed a desire to be shot by them rather than face a long prison sentence, suggesting he had chosen suicide by cop. With the main suspect out of the way, detectives shifted their focus to his mother, Shirley. Although both had been spotted at the mall using the Harris's credit cards, It was Shirley who had forged Dodie's name on the receipts. When confronted with this incriminating evidence, she admitted to using the cards and knowing their source but denied any involvement in the murders. Nonetheless, her knowledge of the killings for 6 weeks led to speculation about her deeper involvement. After considering their options, authorities charged her with burglary, arson, possession of stolen property, and forgery. While investigators believed Shirley had been present at the crime scene at some point, they were not fully convinced of her role in the actual murders. If she was involved, it seemed more likely that she was an accessory after the fact rather than a direct participant in the violence. During the trial, a gas can found at the Harris home on the morning the bodies were discovered was presented as evidence. An officer testified that fingerprints on the can matched those of Shirley King. With undeniable proof of her presence at the crime scene, the jury quickly convicted her on all charges. Shirley was sentenced to 17 to 44 years in prison and was formally handed over to the state, closing the case. However, 2.5 years later, an internal investigation revealed that the law enforcement officer had planted the fingerprint evidence to strengthen the case against Shirley King. Following this explosive revelation, Shirley King's conviction was overturned and she was released from custody. In the subsequent months, all charges against her were dropped and her previous convictions were annulled. In 2007, Shirley King filed a lawsuit against the state of New York for $500 million. Ultimately, she received around $286,000 in compensatory damages. Although she had indeed been wronged, some in the community resented the large settlement. They argued that she had benefited from her son's crimes without showing any remorse for the victims, questioning her entitlement to such a significant payout. Despite this, the decision remained, and she left with the money. Years went by, and Shirley King passed away in 2015 at the age of 80, taking any remaining secrets with her to the grave. Although the complete details of what the Harris family experienced during their final hours will never be fully known, it was unquestionably a night of unrelenting terror. After examining the evidence, it is clear that their suffering at the hands of a stranger they had welcomed into their home out of kindness is truly horrifying. The thought that Tony, Dodie, and Mark were forced to hear Shelby being assaulted in the next room only intensifies the heart-wrenching nature of their ordeal. Demonstrating that animals can sometimes show more compassion than people, the family dog, Annie, chose to remain by Shelby's side rather than seeking safety as flames engulfed the home's second floor. Sensing the gravity of the situation, Annie stayed close to the teenager she had loved and known, choosing to offer comfort rather than escape. Unfortunately, after staying by her side all night, she eventually succumbed to smoke inhalation. It is both tragic and heart-wrenching what the victims of this story endured at the hands of these monsters, despite the kindness extended to them by their hosts. As we reflect on this sorrowful tale, our thoughts are with the victims whose lives were cruelly taken and the loved ones who mourn their loss. December 26, 1997, during the early morning hours in East Bremerton, Washington, a neighbor notices smoke coming from the Hatchney residence and alerts the other neighbors. It doesn't take too long before a 911 call is made and authorities rush their way to the scene. Authorities arrived and got the fire under control, only to then make a grueling discovery, which was accompanied by a smell of burning flesh that made them fear the worst. Inside, they unfortunately find the body of a 28-year-old woman who neighbors immediately recognize as that of Dawn Hatchney. Her husband, Nick Hatchney, had gone for a hunting trip with friends, and at around 10 a.m., he came back home with their dog only to find the house had been on fire and his wife had died as a result of it. Initially ruled as an accidental fire, a gruesome discovery would be made years later and would reveal that something far more sinister was behind it. This is the heartbreaking case of Dawn Hatchney. Dawn Marie Tienhara was born on December 5, 1969, in Seattle, Washington, to Donald Tienhara and Diana Parmel. Donald worked in a shipyard while Diana took care of the home. Dawn was their eldest child and only daughter, and together grew up with her 3 brothers, Dennis, Darren, and Derek, in Bremerton, Washington. According to her mother, her devoutness began at an early age, with her embracing faith and accepting the Lord into her life when she was 4 years old. Dawn faced hardships in her childhood due to her parents' struggles with anxiety and depression that would often lead to frequent conflicts. Around 1980, Diana met a new man, prompting her departure from the family to move in with him. This led to the arrival of another baby. However, the relationship hit a snag, forcing Diana, alongside her newborn, to return to Donald and her other children. Despite these childhood obstacles she faced, Dawn turned all her challenges into doing well in school, dedicating herself to achieving excellent grades. At just 12 years old, she had participated in the Scripps National Spelling Bee, an opportunity that not only led her to the White House, but also allowed her to meet the late former president, Ronald Reagan. In 1988, Dawn graduated and achieved the honor of being the valedictorian at Bremerton Christian School before joining the Northwest College of the Assemblies of God in Seattle. During her college years, she crossed paths with Nick Hachney, and an instant connection sparked between them. However, concerns arose among Dawn's friends when she referred to Nick as the one after just a few dates. They hoped their friend would find a companion who embraced her with unwavering support and genuine affection, expressing apprehension about Nick as they perceived Nick as excessively assertive and overly self-assured, not aligning with Dawn's personality. Nick's upbringing paralleled Dawn's in some ways. He was born and raised in Washington, but unlike her, he hailed from Poulsbo, a coastal city in Washington. Nick also faced troubles within his family from a young age. His father, Dan, immersed in constant work as a mechanic, remained distant when home, neglecting family time and household responsibilities. Meanwhile, Sandra, his mother, juggled a home daycare and foster care, leaving Nick feeling neglected. He confided in friends, expressing a sense of being less favored than his siblings and even the foster kids, perceiving his mother's feelings toward him as hate. Struggling through his mother's prolonged bouts of depression and his emotionally distant father, Nick lacked emotional support or connection from his parents. Despite this isolation, Nick sought comfort in the Bible, finding solace and deepening his involvement in Christianity. While his faith bolstered his self-assurance during his adolescence, it occasionally distanced him from others due to his newfound confidence. Nick and Dawn crossed paths for the first time at their shared college. Dawn's friends found it strange that she would take an interest in Nick, given his opposite traits as mentioned earlier. With time, they began noticing a change in Dawn. She had always displayed confidence through her extrovert nature, was always self-sufficient, consistently driven and striving to conquer new goals. However, in Nick's presence, everything seemed to be the other way around. She became timid, withdrawn, and indecisive, frequently deferring to Nick's choices, even if they clashed with her preferences or made her uncomfortable. It appeared as though Nick had a negative influence on her, contrary to bringing out her best self. Despite this, their love endured, and their relationship persisted, eventually ending up in an engagement after Nick proposed on Alki Beach in 1990. They sealed their commitment with marriage on April 20th, 1991, subsequently moving back to Bremerton. At that point, both had completed their degrees. Dawn secured a position as a loan officer, while Nick embarked on his role as a youth pastor at Christ Community Church on Bainbridge Island, situated across the bay from Seattle. Nick had aspired to become a youth pastor, specifically targeting Christ Community Church due to his bond with his former youth pastor, Bob, also known as P.B. Smith. At that time, P.B. Smith remained with the church, having overseen its affairs since the late 1980s, but had now partnered with Pastor Robert Billy Craig in guiding the congregation. P.B. Smith adopted a more amiable, yet conservative approach to church leadership, whereas Pastor Robert was known for his stringent and radical teachings. Throughout their marriage, Nick consistently made decisions without any opposition from Dawn. Why was that the case, though? Well, both Nick and Dawn adhered to Christian fundamentalism, a community where the wife is expected to submit to her husband's authority, believing it aligns with God's plan. At Christ Community Church, this ideology was explicitly promoted and deemed acceptable. The church even practiced exorcisms on afflicted members, advocated for families to have as many children as deemed by God, and endorsed homeschooling for these children. Their teachings emphasized women's modesty and addressed uncomfortable inquiries about sex. Speaking out against these norms risked excommunication from the church, fostering a climate of silence among dissenters, driven by fear of expulsion. Dawn and the congregation found themselves entrenched in what many would label a cult, with her husband Nick playing a pivotal role in the perilous practices. Nick had shifted his admiration toward Robert and sought direct mentorship under him, steering away from his initial close relationship with P.B. Smith. Dissatisfied with Smith's more relaxed approach, Nick felt he wasn't learning enough and disapproved of what he perceived as leniency, favoring the stringent and extreme methods of Pastor Robert. On the other hand, Robert viewed Nick as a means to accomplish his agenda, ousting Smith and assuming complete control as the senior pastor of the church. By 1997, Dawn and Nick had encountered home-related issues as they frequently relocated, residing in properties they refurbished to sell. Dawn yearned to establish a family and settle into a permanent residence. To address this, Nick found a fixer-upper in East Bremerton, intending for them to move in, renovate, and make it their home. However, the home purchase, renovations, and their house-flipping venture had pushed the couple into debt. Although their outward appearance showcased a seemingly flawless relationship, with Dawn portrayed as the supportive wife accommodating Nick's desires, underlying issues existed far beyond anyone's perception. Dawn had even made a request jokingly to a friend about potentially living with her instead of returning to her parents in case she and Nick ended their relationship. Meanwhile, Nick continued accumulating debt by regularly loaning money to fellow church members. He embarked on his ambitious venture, establishing a Christian youth camp. This endeavor, predictably, proved to be financially burdensome. However, fueled by his fervent desire, he fully committed to the project. He even began scouting properties in Jefferson County, convinced that one of these would serve as the perfect location for the camp. His determination intensified when a congregant, a woman named Sandy Glass, asserted receiving a divine vision, affirming that the property Nick had his eye on was destined to become the site of the youth camp he envisioned. Sandy Glass, who was in her 20s, had already faced considerable hardships in her life. Her first boyfriend had passed away due to an unspecified illness, while her father succumbed to a construction accident. Additionally, her brother battled with addiction. Sandy was married to a man named Jimmy. Their financial situation had been strained for some time. They relied solely on Jimmy's income as a carpenter, with Sandy staying home to care for their children. Similar to Nick, Sandy struggled with reckless spending habits, often exceeding their means, resulting in frequent arguments between her and Jimmy. These disputes sometimes led Jimmy to express his frustration through yelling or by withdrawing himself from the situation and spending hours at the bar. In a bid to address their marital conflicts, the couple sought help from the church and began attending marriage counseling sessions which were facilitated by Nick. At this point, Nick had served as the church's marriage counselor for several years. Many congregants had lodged complaints with Robert about Nick's counseling style, expressing discomfort over his tendency to focus predominantly on intimate inquiries, often dismissing other crucial issues. It appeared that discussions primarily revolved around matters of a sexual nature, neglecting other significant aspects. However, owing to the trust they had in P.B. Smith, who was still affiliated with the church, members presumed that Nick's role wouldn't be entrusted if he wasn't credible. However, by the fall of 1997, Pastor Robert had successfully displaced Smith, assuming the role of senior pastor, a decision fully endorsed by the church board. Smith and his wife then departed for Africa to engage in missionary work. Jimmy's parents, who were church attendees themselves, had viewed Sandy and Jimmy seeking church intervention as a hasty decision. They even questioned Nick's qualifications and experience in guiding their son's marriage. Their concerns deepened when Nick exhibited a conspicuous focus on Sandy individually rather than on the couple as a unit. This heightened attention extended beyond counseling sessions, leading to prolonged phone conversations and an excessive amount of time spent together both at church and even outside the church's surroundings. Jimmy's parents deemed the dynamic between Nick and Sandy as inappropriate, noting their extended interactions and increased closeness, which seemed to surpass the boundaries of a typical counselor-client relationship. Pastor Robert's wife, Pamela, had taken notice of Nick's conduct and had a private conversation with him, expressing concerns about his inappropriate behavior and advising him to focus on his own marriage. Following numerous complaints, Robert intervened, cautioning Sandy that her relationship with Nick was unacceptable and needed to cease. Sandy, feeling a sense of divine connection between her and Nick, reacted angrily to Robert's counsel. She wrote him a letter expressing her discontent, stating, "The judgment I feel from you makes it hard for me to believe that you accept my gifts at all or that you have any confidence in my ability to hear God and use this to help anyone. The relationship between Sandy and Nick was already negatively impacting those around them. Don and Jimmy, along with his children from his marriage to Sandy, felt hurt. In fact, one of their children confided in Jimmy, revealing that Nick and Sandy had mentioned Nick becoming their new father when Jimmy died. At church, Dawn started sharing her distress with friends, revealing her financial turmoil and her earnest desire to have children, a wish Nick vehemently opposed. As 1997 drew to a close, Nick engaged in relationships with multiple women besides Sandy. He was seen engaging in private conversations and prolonged phone calls with these women. Simultaneously, Sandy's purported visions intensified, urging Nick to prioritize the establishment of his youth camp and to allocate more time to their relationship, as she believed they were destined to be together. Dawn, on the contrary, made numerous efforts to rekindle Nick's happiness with her, even going to the lengths of attempting to lose some weight. Certain women within the congregation endeavored to console her, affirming that the issues between her and Nick were not a result of her actions, but rather stemmed from Nick himself being the core problem. Regrettably, her life hadn't unfolded as she had envisioned when she entered into marriage with him. Fast forward to Christmas, Dawn woke up feeling under the weather. Despite being sick with a cold, she and Nick visited her family, spending the whole day together. Later, in the evening, they headed to P.B. Smith's residence, joining his family for some time. Plans were set for Nick to go hunting with Lindsay, Smith's daughter, and her friends the following morning. On the 26th, just before dawn, Nick met up with his companions at Hood Canal Bridge in Jefferson County for the hunting trip. After spending a few hours in the woods without firing a single shot, they decided to leave and headed to a local diner for breakfast around 9 a.m. While everyone was eating, Nick suddenly stood up, appearing concerned, and exclaimed, "Dawn and I haven't opened our Christmas presents." Around 9:30 a.m., Nick departed from the diner and returned home by 10 a.m., only to discover the tragic news of his wife's demise in a fire. Investigators revealed that the fire initially remained contained in the bedroom, sparked by a malfunctioning space heater. The inferno rapidly escalated due to the presence of newspapers and wrapping paper within the room, worsened by the multiple propane containers on the floor. Strangely, despite Nick informing his friends at the diner less than an hour earlier that they hadn't yet opened their Christmas gifts, he informed the authorities that they had indeed opened presents the previous night. He explained that due to Dawn feeling unwell, she retired to bed without tidying up the wrapping paper. Additionally, Nick claimed to have received the propane tanks as a Christmas gift. The couple's ongoing home renovations had led them to rely on space heaters during the winter. Back then, such heaters lacked the safety features seen in modern versions, which resulted in frequent fires and fatalities. Police found no discrepancies in Nick's account. Being a local pastor as well, Nick's standing in the community left law enforcement with no reason to suspect anything other than an accidental death for his wife. Concerned for their pastor's well-being, Nick's congregation sought ways to support him during what they believed was an immensely challenging time. Pastor Robert even proposed attempting to resurrect Dawn through prayer, but Nick declined, citing his wish to spare her any potential pain. This refusal surprised Robert, given Nick's prior willingness to engage in church activities, including the exorcisms they had previously attempted. Mary Glass, Sandra's mother-in-law, harbored immediate suspicions about Nick's involvement in Dawn's death, convinced it wasn't accidental. She urged her husband to approach the police, but this never materialized. Within days, Dawn's death was officially labeled accidental, and the Bremerton police relinquished the case to Nick's insurance company. Nick had already submitted a request to process Dawn's life insurance policy. Family and friends found it peculiar that Nick was dealing with the life insurance so swiftly after Dawn's passing. However, considering the couple's substantial debt and Nick's aspirations for the youth camp, they rationalized his urgency for the money. Some church members found Nick's grieving methods rather unusual, but they refrained from expressing concerns, assuming that everyone copes differently with grief. The church community organized a celebration of life event, serving as Dawn's funeral, where family and friends gathered to share stories and commemorate her life amid their sorrow. Nick remained entirely composed throughout the funeral, and even delivered a 45-minute eulogy. Friends assisting in tidying his home stumbled upon photos of Dawn tucked away at the back of a closet, which seemed as if he wanted to discard them. Subsequently, Nick displayed a harsh and insensitive attitude, not just towards some church members, but also to neighbors and friends. Beyond maintaining multiple relationships with women from the congregation, Nick shockingly engaged in an intimate relationship with Diana, Dawn's own mother, under the pretense of mourning as a widower. Nick's behavior had become intolerable even for Pastor Robert, resulting in Nick being asked to depart from Christ Community Church. This expulsion proved to be a significant blow to Nick, marking the outset of his escalating troubles. On April 10, 2001, Sandy, accompanied by her lawyer, met with the county district attorney and received an immunity offer in exchange for her testimony regarding a long-held secret dating back to the morning of December 26, 1997. According to Sandy, on the morning of Dawn's demise, Nick allegedly contacted her and confessed, saying, "I did it." However, their conversation was abruptly interrupted by another incoming call on Sandy's phone. Putting Nick on hold to answer the call from somebody from the church who informed her about Dawn's incident, Sandy later returned to her conversation with Nick, seeking clarification on what he meant. But Nick only reiterated, "It's done, it's done." Sandy refrained from pressing for more details about the call for several weeks afterward. Eventually, when Sandy confronted Nick, he confessed to administering a substantial overdose of Benadryl to Dawn and suffocating her by placing a plastic bag over her face. The heartbreaking aspect is that Dawn remained partially conscious, witnessing her husband suffocating her through the plastic bag. After ensuring she was no longer alive, he strategically arranged old newspapers and wrapping paper around the room, positioning them beneath her body, and positioned the propane tanks near the bed. He arranged the heater too in a way that it would start a fire, intending to obliterate any evidence of a crime, and instead staged the incident as an accidental fire. Dawn's autopsy findings indicated an absence of soot or carbon monoxide in her lungs and blood. The pathologist in charge of Dawn's examination attributed her death to an accidental fire and overlooked crucial evidence regarding carbon monoxide's adherence to red blood cells. This oversight led them to conclude, given Dawn was a pastor's wife, foul play wasn't involved, neglecting to convey that carbon monoxide attaches to red blood cells, implicating the absence of breathing during the incident. Despite an overdose of 5 times the normal amount of Benadryl, it was deemed insufficient to cause respiratory failure. The pathologist dismissed the possibility, suggesting Dawn, even in a drowsy state, would have reacted to the rising heat. Notably, crime scene photos revealed newspapers beneath Dawn's body, an unsettling detail that went largely unnoticed. While a fire marshal raised suspicions and conversed with the police, the ultimate decision regarding the accidental nature of Dawn's death didn't fall within his jurisdiction. Nick was arrested on September 12, 2001 at a Kinko's parking lot, where he staunchly denied any involvement in Dawn's death, attributing his arrest to the church's attempts at sabotage. Despite his assertions that the church members could inflict substantial harm, Nick faced first-degree murder charges with bail set at $750,000. Sandy's narrative, as conveyed to investigators, appeared bizarre, adding to the frustration stemming from the nearly 4-year delay in considering Nick as a suspect or making an arrest. Her reason for cooperating was equally exasperating, driven by anger over Nick's involvement with other women from the church and feeling exploited. According to Sandy, at that point she concluded that God disapproved of their relationship, consequently implying that Dawn's murder was against divine will as well. Church members, when questioned, recounted Nick's peculiar behaviors and inappropriate relationships, expressing dismay over his failure to even purchase a headstone for Dawn's grave following the life insurance payout. On September 17, 2001, Nick appeared before a judge and entered a plea of not guilty. He asserted that his church had cast a curse upon him, alleging that Pastor Robert possessed a malevolent influence far darker than comprehensible by the police. Nick's trial commenced, prompting a modification in the charges due to the prosecutor's doubts regarding the judge's inclination toward the death penalty, initially sought with the charge of first-degree murder. The charges were amended to aggravated first-degree murder, carrying a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The alteration in charges stemmed from the arson Nick had committed, enabling this revised charge. Witnesses, including the women who were involved with Nick and various church members who had undergone counseling with him, provided testimonies that illuminated Nick's conduct to the jury. These accounts shed light on the significant influence wielded by the church in their lives. They detailed experiences of purported visions and direct messages believed to be from God, exploited by Nick for rationalization and manipulation. Smith's daughter testified, recounting her introduction to Nick through her father and how Nick had groomed her during her teenage years. Their sexual involvement ensued shortly after Dawn's death and persisted until she eventually relocated about a year later. Doctors and forensic experts also testified, emphasizing that Dawn's body held vital clues regarding the events of that day. However, these indicators were overlooked, as mentioned earlier, due to Nick's status as a pastor, despite the abnormal absence of soot and carbon monoxide for someone who was alive and breathing during a fire. The defense vehemently contested these allegations, focusing efforts on framing Sandy as the jealous, vengeful ex-partner, fabricating accusations upon discovering Nick's infidelity with various women. Nonetheless, on December 26, 2002, 5 years post-Dawn's tragic demise, the jury deliberated for a mere day before delivering a guilty verdict for aggravated first-degree murder against Nick. During the subsequent sentencing on February 7, 2003, Nick addressed the courtroom, comprising Dawn's friends and family, vehemently maintaining his innocence while expressing remorse for his actions and expressing sorrow over their loss, acknowledging Dawn deserved better. Nick received a life sentence. However, in 2007, an appeal to the state Supreme Court led to a revision of his life sentence. The appeal contended that since Dawn had already perished due to Nick suffocating her, the original charge of aggravated first-degree murder, pertaining to death by arson, didn't align with her actual cause of death. The defense argued that Nick therefore didn't deserve a life sentence. Ultimately, the state Supreme Court ruled in favor of the appeal, altering Nick's sentence to 26 years in prison. While in prison, Nick has actively supported educational initiatives and co-founded the Environmental Advancement Reintegration Network. He initiated a waste management system, employing worm composting, and even delivered a TED Talk centered on sustainability. Unfortunately, it is indicated that he will become eligible for parole in 2025 and could potentially be released soon. Dawn, gone soon, but not forgotten. Unfortunately, the life she had pictured with whom she believed was the one didn't turn out to be the actual reality, and sadly in the process led to the ultimate betrayal and her heartbreaking and untimely demise. Our heartfelt prayers and thoughts extend to her departed soul and the loved ones she left behind.